July 4th is not only the day Americans typically celebrate their nation's independence, but also an important barometer for freight volumes moving into the summer months. Typically, volumes rise ahead of July 4th, then stabilize until the Labor Day weekend, where back to school drives consumer spending and hopefully higher freight volumes. But what does the current data tell us? And did the freight market secure some freedom from its current recession? Well, folks, we're going to find out in this episode of Loaded and Rolling. Welcome to Loaded and Rolling. I'm your host, Thomas Watson. Freight drives the economy, quite literally. And the current environment has been more stressful for trucking companies than the lingering smell of burning Canadian boreal forests. But for carriers and brokers wondering if things will get better, the devil lies in the details. The details we'll be examining today come from ELD provider and transportation management company Motive, who recently released their July economic report, which highlights retail and freight activity leading up to and following the July 4th weekend. Joining me to talk about this new data and what it means for freight is Hamish Woodrow, data scientist and head of strategic analytics at Motive. Hamish has over a decade plus of engineering and data science experience, from energy transportation to even predicting Airbnb rental prices. Hamish, welcome, sir. Pleasure to have you on.
A pleasure to be on as well. Thanks, Thomas.
Was there anything from Airbnb that you got to study that was really cool that you found out before we dive into the freight?
I think there were some interesting trends back in the day in terms of how to price your own Airbnb rental. I think there was a lot of opportunity back then when I was looking at it probably 5 years ago to really optimize how much money you made during peak seasons. But it's probably a pretty different story just now.
I'm glad I never got into that. I was too busy trying to figure out how to hustle freight. I came from trucking, so it's fun to talk about and bring you on as well, because looking at the economics of it, July 4th is kind of one of the little tent poles in our summer of freight, and this one was really cool. I'm pulling it up here. The first one was the ramp up for big box retail visits. I snagged the graphics as well. And we're looking at an unexpected surge. Tell us a little bit about what this data is saying.
Yeah, so just to give a bit of context on where we're coming from. So, we have IoT devices in hundreds of thousands of trucks around North America. And so what we're monitoring here is visits to those retail distribution facilities. So, we have a great, proportion of vehicles in North America in our network. And so we're able to see what's happening at these distribution centers for some of the largest or the top 50 retailers in North America. And so what we saw coming into this period is that it was a pretty muted ramp up through from Memorial Day to July 4th in terms of the number of trucks going into these facilities, the number of loads basically getting deposited in these distribution facilities. But what we saw, interestingly, is that typically we see the second to last week before the 4th of July is the peak time when the truck the most visiting these facilities. What we saw is this move to the week just before the 4th of July. And so we saw a big jump, about a 3.9% jump week over week in that final week. And so that compares quite differently to what we saw in 2021, what we saw in 2022. It is similar to a trend we saw in the Christmas season last year in December 2022, where retailers were waiting much later to bring in inventory to their facilities. And I think what you're seeing through this data is just a complete change in inventory management. Right now, you don't want to be holding a lot of inventory. A lot of retailers have been trying to drive down inventory. And because overall we have much more capacity in the freight market, so you can get things to the points of sale, to distribution facilities quicker than you were in previous years, you're seeing a wait and see approach from these retailers. Like, they're really waiting till the last minute, as close as possible to when the demand actually happens, to be predicting what they bring into inventory. So it's a lot of risk aversion right now happening in the marketplace.
I think that's pretty fascinating, because we see that in sometimes how they send the loads in advance, how often they'll tender to carriers. So right now, if I'm a retailer, I can basically just find trucks whenever I want. I don't need to keep it in the warehouse and pay the extra costs, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a change from, we've gone through a roller coaster of a couple of years here where especially these inventory managers, these demand managers are like had a big problem. And right now, where's the risk? It's over predicting demand, getting stuck with a lot of inventory, and you see that from a lot of retailers in their public filings. Target over the last year, for example, dropped their inventories by 15%. The discretionary inventories went down 25%. They're really trying to drive down inventory, and I think that's just a trend that we're seeing right now, and there's a lot of risk aversion. And so the freight market overall having more capacity and being much or being able to be much leaner than it has in the last 2 years is just helping these individuals who are planning out demand to just try and do it at the last minute, because the last thing you want to get caught out is increasing your inventories and then sharing that out publicly.
I think that's really cool because we have another one that you all used, normalized daily visits, the big box retails compared to the 6-week ramp up. And that really blows my mind, illustrating the fact that we would see a lot more in 2021. And now in 2023, this kind of behavior is amazing. It's almost like double, or at least by half, it feels like, than what we typically saw during the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the story. Although we're seeing this kind of change in behavior, the overall volumes are far significantly lower than what they were in previous years. So we saw, we're down 14% approximately from 2022, but we're down 30% in terms of the number of trucks visits going into these facilities, these distribution facilities from 2021. So we are definitely seeing a lot less volume going in. We see a lot less shipments going into these facilities, and I think that's just you just need to look at what's being published every month with the inventory to sales ratios. They've been generally climbing for most retailers. Some retailers have been pretty good at bringing down inventory levels, but they're also this risk of waning demand as we go into H2. And so again, even if you're trying to bring down inventories, you're not incentivized to bring in a lot of inventory right now. You're not trying to restock. So I think that's generally what we're seeing. Visits in general to these facilities are far down from the previous 2 years, more in line with what we were kind of seeing in 2019. And then we're just seeing that there's a lot more emphasis on a lean supply chain. These demand planners back in 21, 22, they were getting penalized because they didn't have enough on the shelf. We weren't able to get stuff. We had to wait 6 weeks, 8 weeks for delivery on things. Now that's not the same problem, and what they're worried about is ending up with too much inventory, ending up with misforecasting demand. It's a really difficult forecasting exercise right now for these individuals. So they're just definitely going for a risk averse, waiting for the last minute, and probably compromising a little bit on not having inventory in certain categories.
I wonder if it reminds me of the just-in-time situation, the lean just-in-time delivery, because it felt like the folks who typically use it, we're going back to that now that truckload capacity is just so plentiful.
Yeah, and I think you see that also, where's the biggest hurt from looking at logistic managers index and everything, it's on the inventory side. So this is where they're trying to continue to contract the inventories. And the best way to do that is not be bringing stuff in for weeks and weeks in advance and having it sit in inventory. And especially with, pretty big changes in the way that the consumer is spending that we're seeing, it's also more difficult to know what categories you should be restocking. So I think that's what we've been witnessing a lot. It's kind of crazy, right? Again, for all the demand planners, inventory managers, it's such a change from 2 years ago where you just couldn't get your stuff into facilities. They were waiting to get shipped in. And I think now we're just in a very different paradigm.
I think it's cool. Looking at your data methodology, I pulled that out as well. Over 120,000 customers, and then the Motives Technologies embedded more than 20% for for-hire trucks in North America. So that's a treasure trove of telematics, as well as information on how long they're sitting. Was there anything interesting? I know they're sending things last minute. Was there any data or any inkling if it meant that drivers were waiting longer in the geofence, even though it was last minute? Or is it generally, because I don't have as much inventory, maybe I can actually unload you quicker, and we're seeing less time spent within those geofences?
Yeah, so we track detention periods in facilities. So we look at facilities, we look at everything going in, the trucks visiting them, but we also look at how long they're spending there. In general, we've seen a slight improvement, but it's not universal. You're going to see certain big box retailers being very efficient in getting their their trucks out as quickly as possible. But in general, you see others that are more struggling on this side of where detention periods have gone up slightly. So in general, we see actually a pretty large diversity in terms of how these have improved. But on aggregate, we're seeing some improvement in detention periods. I think, like if we think back to some periods in the previous 2 years, you had such a radical amount of increase month over month in the number of trucks going into these facilities. We saw some of these distribution facilities getting twofold the normal increase of trucks during the same time period, and so coping with that amount of volume was very difficult. In general, you saw a lot of investment in increasing warehousing capacity, increasing facility sizes during this period of time. They're kind of more to the underutilized side right now, and so that's why on aggregate we're seeing improvement. But again, it's not universal across every carrier. It really depends on how you're managing it. Every distributor. It depends a little bit on how you're managing it, and also what they're emphasizing at this period of time.
And I think we have a big box retail index as well, which highlights that. Trucks visiting the top 50 retail distribution centers, and 2023 is the dark line at the bottom. So similar to the other two charts that we were looking at, and it is definitely a return to a form of normalcy. But I do wonder, because from my experiences with DCs, grocery distributors have a hard time, even in the best or worst times. Sometimes large retail, your what are the different brands? I don't want to throw a specific customer name out, but you can sell everything from soap to, consumer goods. I wonder if there's any winners and losers in the data sets, or if it's clustered to a point where you could see which DCs appear to be outperforming, and if it's based on their own processes, or if it's based on, like we see this bottom number, it's just less people showing up.
Yeah, so I think in general, we're seeing across the whole top 50 retail index, decreases in volumes. Obviously, you're going to have some winners in there who are seeing increases, but in general, we're seeing overall muted volumes coming into these facilities. I think we try not to also go too deep into individual retailers for kind of obvious reasons. But when we look at it in general, obviously the ones that show most strength are those that have a more diversification outside of discretionary spending. So more your staples, more things that and you can see this in how the consumer is spending right now. The things that will stay the course, in essence, even if we see a downturn. So we're definitely seeing some strength in retailers that just have a bit more diversification outside of discretionary spending. And so that's probably the one area of strength that we're kind of seeing.
I'm excited with these data sets because I remember we'd see, when I came from a very large asset carrier, we would see traditional surges. Like we had a customer, Walmart, would surge and reposition equipment in advance, front load them to stores. But having that point that certain customers are exposed differently, I do wonder if the ones who are like CPG and snack are doing a lot better than, let's say, I'm making fridges and lawnmowers because Fed rates are higher, or maybe I don't need that new fridge, but I'll still eat my potato chips.
Yeah, I think I think you're definitely on the right tracks in terms of where you're thinking that in terms of what's going to be strong during this period. I think the large purchases we've even seen from kind of overall public data are not happening. I think that there's some interesting points coming up over the next few months. I think the overall back to school season is going to be interesting. There's a lot of noise right now, and it makes it kind of hard from what the Fed's publishing, what you see in different economic reports. It's kind of hard to know exactly how H2 is going to trend. So we have some milestones and signposts on our own calendar for looking at exactly how freight is moving in North America. But I think we are going to see certain categories can remain strong. I think, though, we'll probably see some weakening categories also coming up as you go into H2.
It feels like a tale of two cities. I'm curious because this data is amazing. I feel like having the ability as well for a future report, separating by carrier size. A larger carrier may have their own trailers. They can afford 3. We'll see because a lot of folks I talk to in trucking, when we look at this data and they're wondering how carriers are doing, well, it just kind of depends. Are you waiting at this DC for them to load your trailer and you have to deal with them? Or are you simply picking one up and they could have taken 5 days to do it and it just kind of gets put under the rug? But the geofence data will pick that up because you're in and out with a preload versus a 2.5, 4 hour, live load.
Yeah, on that side, like it's one of the great things of being here. This sort of data so far upstream in kind of our supply chain gives, and also we're like so many trucks across a lot of different industries. You know, we have everything spanning from industry, from oil and gas to manufacturing to what we're talking about here on retailers. We're seeing a lot of different trends, and so I think for me, it's a great as a data practitioner, as an analyst in this space. I really enjoy playing with this data and looking at it and trying to find trends and ultimately serve those back to customers. And that's, ultimately that's one of the things that we're seeing as a big trend among customers that we have, prospects. It's just visibility. Like visibility is so key right now in terms of where are your assets, how are they getting utilized, how efficiently am I running my business, and just that overall visibility and how products like we have can enable that. That's a big trend right now because at the end, that's what your CFOs are going to be pressured for is like how efficiently are you using your assets, how efficiently are you using your cash, how's your operating ratios. So that sort of insights, including the facilities side, is one of the reasons also we invest quite a bit of time trying to delve into our data across 120,000 customers and come up with insights that can kind of help our fleets also better navigate this period of time through 2023.
I like that idea because when I was at a large carrier, what was funny was they made geofences, but it was a homebrew TMS. So like when I was at US Express, you'd have 2,500 trucks on an OTR side that would use customer geofences for EDI transactions. But the problem became that the customer reps would actually make the same geofence, and it took them about 6 weeks one time to just go through and compile all the geofences into one agreed upon one because people would just make a new geofence and then you could never tell how good things were going, and it was so frustrating. Is that kind of the opportunity you're offering for fleets? I've used the Motive platform at my old startup. Is that kind of this opportunity where you can get actually better insights compared to having to manually drill your own and figure it out?
I think that there's a lot to be said in how sort of suppliers like us, we see such a wide swathe of like vehicle types, distribution facilities, new ones popping up all the time, just because of the size of our network. We typically have so many more vehicles in our network compared to any other carrier out, or the majority of carriers out there. So the insights such as auto geofence creations, or even safety insights and how your drivers perform on the safety side versus all drivers in our network in North America. These sort of, and we do that through our drive scores. Those things like we can develop at an aggregate level because we just have such a wide range of customers, vehicle types, trailer types, and we can solve problems. Seeing everything that's happening in different companies that apply better practice, that influence our product, as well as seeing how we can automate certain processes that take a huge amount of time for every single company. And the same problem is evident across almost every single company. You'll see commonality in those problems. And what we can do is just focus our efforts on single problems, solve them for one customer possibly, and then solve them for all the customers at the same time that are in our network. Because, I think in times like this, where there's huge amount of uncertainty, the industry went from, $5.78 last year in 2022 on diesel prices to whatever, $3.80 just now. You're seeing these massive swings in diesel. And so like how we can help that is manage your fleet better, manage it more efficiently, think about fuel, develop products centrally rather than these companies now needing to develop internal solutions, always to solve the problem that is a common problem across industry.
Oh, it's really cool because in the lean market, carriers are going to try to save time. I feel like I got to get y'all in touch with Dr. Crow with MIT. So one of their research is they took aggregated ELD data to find out that on average, drivers only drove about 6.5 hours a day. And a driver has 11 hours of time they could theoretically drive. Other things. And so I think that's fascinating because with your software and your telematics, you're able to give fleets this opportunity that eventually, maybe I'm going from Atlanta to Chicago. Here's on average carriers that ran this lane averaged in transit, and here's how my drivers are doing. It opens up things like scorecards when before it was just, I'm just lucky to book freight, or in the past 2 years, I could book any freight. I didn't care about being efficient, like running my business. I just threw money at a wall. I could make money.
Yeah, and actually, it's a really good point. Especially, right now, you hear a lot about AI. You're hearing a lot about how machine learning models are being applied across businesses. The biggest problem that most businesses will face is a lack of good quality data. It's very hard for you internally to build solutions generally because you don't have enough data, or it's very isolated. Sometimes you'll see it in fleets that they have a high concentration of certain types of vehicles, and when they try and bring in new vehicles, like that's hard because it's a new data set. You have very low sample size. So actually building really good, robust models is very complicated, but it's to our benefit because we have a network that is, we have 700,000 plus assets and vehicles in our network. We can really see everything that's happening and build pretty good models happening across, million plus drivers. We can really look at what's happening in this across your network, across all the big problems, like efficiency, safety, compliance. These are things that we can build out and apply good machine learning techniques to, and actually make it helpful for fleet managers. I think that's where I see a good trend that we can actually help in the industry, but also across how tech can be applied is we're probably at this point where we can really deploy algorithms and AI to actually really assist those managing fleets to do a much better job at things that typically take a long time or very difficult or near impossible to get at. And that's everything from, how our dash cams can really help you understand driver behavior, understand coaching habits, how our drive score is used to assess, where, how good the driver's quality of driving, especially for newer drivers entering fleets, which is always a difficult one. We can really help there because we have the access to the data. And even more recently with spend management, we have a spend management platform that helps with fuel purchasing and predominantly just now, but overall purchasing and maintenance through our cards. That sort of data, we know the network of all sort of fuel up locations. We also know the compliance records of our customers. We know the hours of service. We also know how well they save, and we can integrate all that to provide suggestions about where drivers should stop, how they fuel up, and that can help everything from small customers become more efficient at saving more money as they drive, but also help large customers who find it very difficult to manage 2,000 plus drivers in one network and get the visibility. And that's really, I think actually there's, building good tech is hard, but we're at this point where actually we can probably assist a lot in the optimization of fleets during this time, especially around how uncertain it is.
And I think that's great because looking at, circling back with the economic report, we know that on average, fewer visits are going to DC. So if I'm in charge of that large 2,500 truck fleet, I know that it's not just me, it's everybody else. Because customers will lie and they'll say, I don't have anything to send, and then they'll send it to somebody else. And it's really, they're just getting a better deal down the routing guide. But I'm curious about the AI-powered stuff because large fleets with their homebrew, they used to have driver tech systems and other ones, Omnicrom, Samsara, they would send the info to the driver and they would tell them exactly when to route, but I always felt like this was just arbitrary, which was this is X amount of closest place I could stop within route, and then drivers would just stop for the day, and they're like, oh, it's 3 p.m., whatever. So the new thing is to take all this data, use the algorithms and the modeling to say, on average, a driver who picked up from here and went here, typically fueled here, your stops are in this cluster, and if you go a little farther, then you could be more optimal. You can help walk them through their day now, like a virtual assistant.
Yeah, and that starts from the driver inspection reports at the start, even things like helping which drivers need most help in finishing the inspection reports, ensuring that you have full compliance on that side, to understanding the routes. And I think this is really the potential that you have is how you integrate the solutions. There's different ways you can do it, from suggestions to full on planning upfront. I think that's the exciting part. Is and there's going to be an interesting period of time over the next couple of years as you kind of see what I'm going to call AI kind of assistance coming in and supporting your fleet. And we do it today through, for example, our safety platform, which will automatically detect unsafe driving behavior. So our cameras can detect, lane changing at a very high accuracy. It can change close proximity to vehicles in front. Driving behaviors that we know over time will lead to accidents. And so what we notice is that we can raise those to safety managers in the fleet. We can help in identifying that. You no longer need to look at a lot of video or wait for incidents to happen and then look at videos. You can really proactively go out and catch behaviors and change their trends, and then track the score through something like our drive score. And one of the things that also helps here is because we have a lot of fleets, we can benchmark you. I think one of the things that's hard is in managing large companies is how am I doing? And I think that's something that we try and integrate into our product. It's also like how you're doing relative towards peers. And I think that that's like an area that you can have a lot more insight in our platforms.
Well, looking forward to it. If folks want to, running out of time here, but we're definitely have to have you on again because I would love to have a chatbot give a driver and coach them without me having to do it. There's a future here. Folks want to learn more about Motive, find out, or sign up for the report. What's the best way to get in contact?
Yeah, so we publish it every month. You're going to see it on our blog out there. And so gomotive.com is the best place to generally find us.
Perfect. Hamish, thanks so much. Looking forward to seeing how it goes as well as the tech. So keeping an eye out. That's going to be a wrap for today. But don't fret if you missed this. We'll be on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. And we have a newsletter, freightwaves.com/loaded and rolling, Thursdays at 2. That's a wrap. Catch you next week. Do it live.